Hey guys, how you doing? This is Baruch. You're listening to the Postkahanism podcast. I'm here doing another great book review with Mr. Dictator's Den. Today we're reviewing a book that he recommended, which I'm very glad I read, called The Book of Matt, about the murder of Matthew Shepard. It's written by a guy named Stephen Jimenez. And yeah, I'll let Matt kind of take it away. I'll let Mr. Dictator's Dad take it away from here. Sorry,
You're good.
it's late here. I'm
Um,
tired.
no, you're fine. This book is really special. I like true crime stuff because I think that the best true crime just captures things about the society where the crime happened and why it was investigated or covered that way. And this is no different. So if you want to learn about like the Warren Court and all of just the stuff, a lot of it really awful, that happened in like the 60s and 70s, you can either watch the Onion Field movie with James Woods or you can read the book by Joseph Wambaugh, which is a phenomenal. It's one of the best true crime books ever written.
Wait,
Um,
what's this book about? Hang
it's
on.
about these cops that were murdered
No,
by
no, no, no,
these.
no, no. The book we're reviewing.
Oh
The
yeah,
Book
yeah,
of
yeah. No,
Matt.
no. Okay, I'm sorry. I was just saying, like, but for the Book of Matt, okay, it's similar to the Onion Field. It's just like a situation where the crime itself gets overlapped by just the court system and the media, and basically there is like a student at in Laramie in the University of Wyoming, Matthew Shepard, um, was at a bar called the Fireside Lounge, and he met with two people, and one of them was Aaron McKinney, the other was Russell Henderson, and he got a ride with them home. And they took him out to the subdivision that Aaron McKinney had grown up in. It was sort of a wooded area. There was cactuses there. They were And McKinney basically pistol whipped him to death and left him there for 18 hours, where he died of hypothermia and just brain trauma. It's really horrific. But basically, what happened is that the media covered it like this. They covered it like two rednecks assaulted this gay student who was dressed nice at this bar, and they didn't know him, but they just sized him up and they said, look, this is an easy target. And we can really, like, what is it called? What is the term now? Hit a lick. We can just, if we beat him, but that's not really what happened. So I'm not saying well, Aaron McKinney killed him, but the point I'm making is that, they knew him before. Aaron McKinney, Russell Henderson did not know him before, but Aaron McKinney
Wait,
knew him
wait, wait.
before. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I
Just a sec.
apologize.
Just a sec. Just a sec. I want to before we get into the weeds, I want to just give a little bit of context. Okay.
Okay. I'm sorry. I went a roundabout way, but my bad.
No, no, no. I just want the audience to kind of get the context. What are we talking about? So this book is basically about the author Stephen Jimenez, who is a very conventional journalist, well respected mainstream media dude, and he sometime after this murder, which at the time, as you said, was kind of presented to the U.S. as this like horrible homophobic hate crime where these horrible rednecks killed this dude for nothing more than being gay. Um, and he started investigating it like a
Yeah.
decade after. And he
Well,
started
he was there initially. He was there
right,
initially, but he kept going deeper and deeper, and he eventually became obsessed with this case.
right. And then he started finding all sorts of things which that story did not fit. Now, that story was politically exploited. There was a huge, back in the late 90s when all this went down. I mean, I was in high school and I remember this. There was a huge national um, debate over, you can say, gay rights or gay privileges or whatever.
Yeah.
What eventually turned into this like gigantic bull mastiff under Obama was at this point sort of a puppy. And this
Yeah.
was kind of a crucial point for the Clinton administration, and all these kind of gay lobby groups, which piled onto this case and used it to push through a bunch of legislation and really
Yes.
change the national discourse. To where before it was like, hey, is being gay really, like, is it a bad thing? Is it like a personal choice that should be kept private, but, don't stress us out with it? Afterwards, it was like, you disgusting bigot, you want to, beat us to death and leave us, crucified on a barbed wire fence on the prairie, like you did to Matt
And
Shepard.
I remember in high school too. And again, I'm younger than you. But I remember something that one of my teachers casually mentioned that we used to. There was a thing with the light blue shirts. There was a whole day of silence thing. This is, and where they talked about how, like, they talked about the graphic details. And again, it was graphic. It was a horrible. It was a very violent, vicious thing that happened. But they talked about how, like, the person who found him, I think the guy's name was Kreifels, who was a mountain biker. I'm going to mention him later if we have time. But he thought it was a scarecrow, but he, the only part of his face that wasn't bloody was where his tears had washed away. And they
Right.
always emphasize that. And they talk about crucifixion. He wasn't crucified. It was a vicious crime, but there was like truths mixed with like half truths. And but this was still a thing. This happened in 1998, and it was still a thing. Like, it's probably still a thing today. You have these musicals, the Laramie Project, which is a reference to the town of Laramie, Wyoming, which we're going to talk about a lot. But and I'm I'm sorry I went kind of too broad and also too narrow for the intro, but
So this guy was like
yeah,
the gay George Floyd.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
This dude was really,
Yes.
he was really turned into a saint and a martyr. And I'm
Yes.
going to, like, if you're going to read the book, which you all definitely should, and you hate spoilers, turn this off now, because I'm going to just kind of lay out, because the book is fairly, I mean, it's not that long, but it's a little bit long, and it's the narration of the author as he talks to this guy and he talks to that guy and he compares their stories and he talks to everybody, and then this kind of, I'm going to kind of jump into the bottom line up front. Okay. And a lot of stuff that this guy, I think, wants to say, he left between the lines because he is a professional, serious journalist, and he only wanted to put down like what he had receipts for. But
Yeah.
I'm reading this stuff and I'm seeing a bunch of stuff between lines, so I'll throw it out there, and then you can feel free to correct me. And I'm just going to give like a very brief bottom line up front of
Yeah.
what this guy found. What this guy found was that Matt Shepard, who was a student at the University of Wyoming, he wasn't just a gay student at the University of Wyoming. He was a guy who was basically involved. He had a very rough past. He'd been apparently, read between lines, molested as a child.
He'd also been raped in Morocco or
well,
something.
he said he was raped in Morocco. I'm not sure, because later he made false rape accusations in a similar.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
situation.
You're 100% right.
But
Yeah.
I'm assuming he was molested as a child based on his subsequent behavior. He had either raped or sexually assaulted 2 8-year-old kids when he was 15. He was gay, and he had HIV.
Yes.
And he came from this like
True.
very, very posh family, but a very, very very rough past. And at this point, Laramie was sort of the drug distribution hub of Wyoming, and there were apparently 2 drug distribution networks in it that were sort of they had their retail side in Laramie. One pipeline came from the west, from like California through Nevada, and another one came from the south, from Mexico, Texas, and up, I guess, through Denver. Jimenez kind of mentions that at this point, meth was an underground thing, and it was mostly coming out. Most of it was being made in Mexico. So there was like this underground scene there in Laramie. There was also apparently an underground sex trafficking scene, which was both gay and
more
straight.
than Just can I add an aside?
Yeah.
Like one of the things it's completely, and everything you've said is 100% true as far as like what we both know. Neither of us have been to Laramie, Wyoming, but having read the book, and as you say, he does provide receipts, and he will often, there's clearly some times where he will have a killer interview or piece of information, but he'll say, I can't verify it. So I don't think Jimenez is ever operating in bad faith. And he got a lot of flack for this. Like I've watched, but everything that you said is true from from the book. But the, one of the weirdest things about the homophobia just in Laramie is that it's a college town. First of all, there is a gay and lesbian student alliance there, and we can just go into all these incidents later. But there is a scene in the book where there's an interview at the end where there is a bar called the Ranger Bar. You can Google all these bars. I was Googling them when I was reading this book, just the locations, just trying to get, because he described it so well. But there is a gay prostitution ring going on there. It is unconnected. There is a guy who's going to become very important in this later, named Doc O'Connor, who doesn't quite live in Laramie. He lives in a place called Bosler, which is outside of it. He is running a gay prostitution ring. And then, the false rape accusation, the person who hit him, I think, had lesbian roommates. The killer had some gay and lesbian. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. There's multiple gay,
right?
Like escort things in this town, which has 30,000 people. Does that sound like a homophobic town where there's like multiple? Like, how is there even enough clientele for this? Clearly, there's a lot of gay people that live here, just regardless of the college gay and lesbian aspect. That's just kind of funny in and of itself.
Sure. So
I'm
right.
sorry, Baruch.
So how the gay thing first shows up here is that this guy, Matt Shepard, apparently goes to work for this guy named Doc O'Connor, who lives in a renovated hog ranch, or this was like how you used to call
a brothel,
a very special kind of brothel. This is what it says. I looked up the hog ranches on the internet, and the only one I could find was like something outside of Laramie, 3 miles outside of Laramie, which apparently serviced the soldiers who were stationed there when it was Fort Laramie.
Well, the Ranger Bar also had prostitution there. That's the oldest bar in Laramie. There's a lot of meth dealing there too.
Sure. But the first thing I found about the hog ranch is some Army lieutenant that was shocked at it, and he goes, "Yeah, these were like the most depraved creatures of both genders that I've ever seen," and this is like in 1870 whatever. So this dude, Doc O'Connor, runs a bunch of businesses. He's in the Eagles. What is it called? The Eagles
Lounge.
The Eagles Lounge, which is kind of like their Elks.
It's like a philanthropy thing.
It's a fraternal
that's
order,
a cover.
Like the Elks or the Shriners,
Veterans
or whatever.
of Foreign. Okay,
yeah. Which later turns out is also a cover for some sort of weird gay orgy thing. But he's like a semi well-respected businessman there. And when this guy goes and interviews him, he mentions, his youth when he was making gay pornography and he was hanging out with the Denver Mafia guys. He was a hustler, right? So he was a gay prostitute himself. A hustler is a gay prostitute, for those of our listeners who are privileged to not know that. You're welcome. Now you know. A young man who works the rough trade, I think the British call it. And so this guy, and he runs a few things. He runs a limousine company, which basically is kind of a cover for sex trafficking across state lines. And that in itself is also a cover for moving meth and I guess cocaine from Denver, where there's a big underground gay scene where, again, it's more gay prostitutes hanging out in a few bars. And from there, these guys move meth in Doc's limousine service up to Fort Collins, which is on the way to Laramie, and to Laramie itself, up the what is it, I-25, I believe.
I looked up the map beforehand. I think that it's like, I think I-25 is one of them. I think 287 is the other one. Hold on. Um,
I used to be stationed out in Colorado, and I used to drive up there, but not
really?
not well, not to visit,
There's 287. 287 will take you. I'm looking at the map right now. Laramie is actually in very southern Wyoming.
Hmm.
But it's about 2 hours from Denver. It's not far, and um, everything that you've said is true. And again, I am delighted you read this book because it's just so weird and creepy. And I'm not trying to make light of it, but I was just remember this in high school, and then all this gross, awful stuff that has come to light just from reading this book, and how all of this was just omitted. They didn't even dip their toes in this stuff.
Sure,
And
but
but
wait,
it's just like,
wait,
go ahead.
wait. So this guy Matt is helping move meth from Denver.
Yes.
He works for this guy Doc O'Connor, who is out there, I guess, running gay prostitutes, is generally a pimp and is having sex with them as well. There's mention
Well,
that he raped this Matt dude at some point.
I don't. Well, can I just add a
Yeah,
weird
yeah,
thing about the? So clearly Matt had dealings with Doc O'Connor, and apparently after Matt died, Doc O'Connor got a lawyer right off the bat, and Jimenez was like, "Well, that's weird because you're not even charged with, you're not even a suspect." But
right.
it's clear that Doc knows a lot, and he's a lot like. There is a 2020 interview on YouTube. You can type in 2020 Matthew Shepard. That's very good. It covers like maybe 10% of the great stuff in this book. But it is, Jimenez did try to like at least cover this honestly back in the day. Like maybe 6 years after this happened, he interviews Henderson and Aaron McKinney, which we'll get to later.
We're in jail right now, right?
But yes, yeah, oh yeah, they're never going to get out of jail. But there is in the book, I feel like Jimenez, because he would go to the bars and he would talk to these seedy locals and stuff, and he would just talk to he would talk to so many people, and that's why it was just such great true crime, because he just was not, there was no one he was unwilling to talk to, including the lowest of the low, just the grossest people. But in my opinion, what was going on with Matthew is he obviously, as you said, was transporting meth with Doc, but there was a group in Denver called like it's just called the Denver Group in the book,
Yes.
and there's a guy named Mark Rohrbacher, and he's out of prison now. After I think a few years after Matthew was murdered, he got sentenced for meth trafficking, but he admitted that he knew Matthew, and Matthew was clearly dealing with him. It's not clear if I'm sure there's no way Mark Rohrbacher didn't know Doc, but Rohrbacher said in a jail interview, he said, he knew Matt, and he like kind of helped Matt, like when Matt was living in Denver before he went to Laramie. He told him how to deal meth. He showed him the ropes, but he said, I wasn't the one giving meth to Matt. I was giving meth to the people that were giving meth to Matt.
Right.
And I think they would do like 2 runs a week. Basically what happened is they would get like 12 ounces of meth, and Matthew would go on these runs, and 6 ounces would go to Fort Collins, as you said, and then the 6 ounces would go to Laramie, and they would get, broken up, and you would get about a quarter ounce, which I think they translate into $800. You have to figure that for 1998 money. That's a decent bit of money, not worth getting pistol whipped to death over. But so it seems like Matt was doing business with Rohrbacher, and then he was also doing stuff with Doc. I don't know how Doc and Rohrbacher were connected, but
I think that Rohrbacher was talking about Doc when he says the people that would give meth to Matt, because when you look at the way that Doc O'Connor ran his male prostitutes, apparently having them dependent on drugs is a big part of the game.
100%.
And so that makes sense that Doc was the guy that Mark Rohrbacher, or Mark K, as he was called, also was the plug for. But the point I'm making is that there were other people associated with this group, and the one that was the most, played the biggest role, aside from obviously Matt Shepard, who like, as we can see, like from this point, this dude was not like some schoolboy going to like drama class at the University of Wyoming, right? The other guy was Aaron McKinney. who
Yes.
was the guy that ended up killing him. And
Yes.
Aaron was, I guess, in some ways similar to Matt, but in most ways very different because he came from also an abusive background.
He
Um,
was molested as a kid too.
he
Some
was
like
molested as a
you
kid.
mentioned that.
Every like gay person that I've actually asked personally has said they were molested as a kid. Maybe that's just like a great big coincidence, but like every time that I've met somebody that was a homosexual and I would by ask them, they would always say like, yes, there was something like that. So
Can you hear me okay, by the way? Is my
yeah, I can hear you
microphone
fine. Your
okay?
microphone
Okay.
works great. It's a lot better than yeah. So so and McKinney was a little bit more of a road cannon. He was also doing male prostitution for Doc
Yes.
O'Connor, but it seems like he was a little bit more like
He
he
was
was more.
bisexual.
Well, you're right. He was bisexual, but he was also he was violent, and it seems like he was a little bit more like maybe a contractor type deal, where he was like a little bit more of an independent, semi-independent businessman in the meth scene.
He was well, the redneck thing is kind of funny because if you read about Aaron McKinney, he's basically a wigger, and I'm sorry to say,
Yes.
like it seems like when white people just go feral, they always revert. It's like when stray dogs, when you look at all the breeds, you have pugs, you have chihuahuas, you have Great Danes,
Yeah,
but
that
then when you look at
yellow
this,
archetype.
yeah, the stray dogs in like Tegucigalpa or in Ghana or something, you can see them everywhere. It's like it seems like when like I don't know, McKinney, that sounds Scotch Irish, but it seems like they just revert back to this wigger archetype. Like he had like a tattoo like of just pouring a 40 on his. Okay, so Aaron McKinney kind of grew up. He got molested when he was growing up, which is sad. His mother died. I think they did a surgery for a hysterectomy, but he got $100,000 settlement. So what do you think he spent it on? He spent it on like he put it in the Roth IRA. No, he didn't. He spent it on meth and stuff, and he got highly addicted to drugs, and he had a sad childhood. But he was a violent. He also was like very small physically, and
They were
he
all
was
small.
just very yeah, yeah,
All
yeah. Russell Henderson, McKinney, yeah.
all
But
three of these guys were manlets.
yeah, but he was just a violent, like just, but
Manlet wigger.
yeah,
He was an angry mini wigger, an angry gay mini wigger.
but he he listened to rap music. He was just he was not this. Just they tried to portray him, but okay. The thing I wanted to mention is that and I'm not trying to do a spoiler. Like we're gonna talk about how
No, it's all gonna be spoilers.
The victim knew the perpetrator, but I want to mention this point because Jimenez looked through the court documents and stuff, and someone sent a letter, and we'll talk about Mr. Bills in a second. You know how they were basically he said that like Aaron McKinney was voluntarily prostituting himself out because he realized he could get money, and he liked having sex with men apparently because he would often. We'll get into this, but the point I'm making is that there was a scene where someone was with Matthew Shepard on campus for some gay event, and there was a person named John, and that's how they're identified in the book. They're not Jimenez doesn't mention like he doesn't dox them, but he says, Aaron McKinney was hanging out with them, and they came up to them, and it was clear they were a couple. And as they walked away, John and Aaron McKinney, Matthew said to his friend, he said, they're not actually boyfriend. John is paying Aaron for it. But John, this university person who was having sex with Aaron McKinney, who was the guy who killed Matthew Shepard, later became one of the biggest advocates and just talked to the media and pushed this homophobia narrative when he was having sex voluntarily with the person who pistol whipped Matthew Shepard. So clearly he's having like gay sex.
Okay, so this guy that came out and started telling stories about how homophobia and he was actually having sex with the murderer who supposedly was so homophobic.
And then hold on though, Jimenez actually was like, "Can I interview you? I won't use your real name." And the person, John, I read the book. I'm not trying to slander anyone. You can read the book. Nothing that Baruch and I are saying is not in this book. We're not doing conjecture. We're not like slandering anyone. Everything is in here. But the guy, I think that he was like, "Can I interview you?" And as
So he doesn't want to be interviewed, right? This guy.
But he said it would make the university look bad. It's like, no, I think it would make you look pretty bad because you're a liar.
patronizing a hustler. So this guy, and I guess Henderson apparently was also in this, maybe more peripherally. Yes.
Okay. Oh, go ahead. Are you going to talk about Mr. Bills?
I wasn't going to talk about Mr. Bills. Please go ahead. Yes.
So the initial letter that Jimenez thought that they both were gay hustlers because he basically in Denver there was a extinct gay bar called Mr. Bills, and again there was this other person that I think he might have been from Laramie. He was a homosexual teacher, and he got thrown off an overpass, but Again, Jimenez, I don't think thinks it was a hate crime. He thinks it was probably like some kind of
drug deal gone bad. Yeah. Hello?
Crime or hello? Do we break up? I'm sorry, man. I got storms my way. I apologize.
It's okay.
But basically, initially, the gay bar people at Mr. Bill's knew that Aaron McKinney was there with Doc O'Connor and Matthew Shepard. But Russell Henderson, they initially identified him, but it probably wasn't him because there's later stuff in the book where I don't think Henderson knew Matthew Shepard before this. He never even spoke to him really, even during the crime. I think happened, and this is even more disgusting, is that it was probably Aaron McKinney's cousin who's nicknamed, I think
Bear.
His name was Adrian Bear. Yeah. And so
the McKinney family, the McKinney family, by the way, is like an established, respected family in Laramie.
Yeah. They had a restaurant or something. Yeah.
Right. So, yes. So Bear, I guess, was also involved in all this.
But imagine going with a pimp with your cousin to like just a gay bar, and I think that the prices too. Doc was like, yeah, $40, and it's just like, even in like,
well, that was 1998, buddy. Come on now.
Yeah, that's like $100. Like, but just imagine doing that, like with. So there's a lot of unpleasant truths that get unearthed.
So these guys were pretty depraved. And I want to kind of like talk about the significance of all this later. But in any case, McKinney apparently had gotten more and more addicted and more psychotic, and owed more and more people money, which both these guys, both him and Shepard, owed people money and had a lot of problems due to it. But McKinney's solution was apparently to knock this guy over. And it would seem that night there was supposed to be a shipment because Shepard had ordered a limo ride from O'Connor, down to Denver for that night. Now, this is like a weekday night, and McKinney,
it was Tuesday night.
Yeah, right. And Shepard, has got money problems, and he's got midterms and stuff, and yet he's ordering a limousine ride to Denver, which is like 2 hours away. Like they can't be less than $1,000, Yes. And so Jimenez, like this, Jimenez's context for this is that this was actually like doing a drug run, and this falls through. Doc O'Connor cancels this thing at the last minute.
Yeah,
and McKinney, who had spent this whole day dragging Henderson, who was his coworker on a roofing crew, around town trying to pull various schemes, like hit a lick, as you mentioned, and maybe sell a gun or whatever. But actually, this is all a cover for robbing somebody. And
go ahead. There was a guy named Bob who was actually raised by like Amish people in Pennsylvania. That's who he got the gun. He traded it for meth, but McKinney had ripped off, like, I don't know how he got a bunch of cocaine, but he was his business model, because he was just a
degenerate, weird, homosexual.
Yes. He would try to get people to front him meth, and then he would pay him back, but he had like done the meth or just not calculated right. So he owed the money
in the scheme. Yes.
But
he hadn't gone to, if he'd gone to the University of Wyoming Business School.
Yeah, if he had gone to the University of Wyoming Business School, he would have met other meth addicted homosexuals, and he could have just robbed them also, I guess. I don't know.
It's also a business model. Does it scale though?
Well, not for him. I mean, he's like gonna die in death row, or not death row, but I think he's in Mississippi. I looked this up. I think he's in some weird prison in Mississippi now. But that whole thing is weird. He traded a couple grams of meth for a gun from Ryan Bopp, and Ryan Bopp,
she was going to sell the gun for meth.
Well, that's what he said, but he was really just going to rob it. And Henderson kind of knew. There's a guy named Kenneth Hasselhoon who is in the story, and this second part's really weird because Hasselhoon didn't learn. Like McKinney said, he was going to rob him, but Hasselhoon is just introducing McKinney. He's driving him to dealers' houses, but McKinney knew all these people. There's a guy named John Earl Baker, I think. I looked him up. He still is alive somehow. He's been doing meth, but he was a big figure in the meth scene. He talked to Jimenez, and he also agreed that the Shepard murder was over dope. But Hasselhoon, when he was talking to Jimenez, he's not trying to mention a lot of this stuff. He's just like, what do you know? Like, I'm going to talk to you about this. I'm not going to talk. But it's super weird because they were basically Matthew Shepard would be at the library bar, and that's where Aaron McKinney took Russell Henderson at first. Then eventually Matthew Shepard's at the Fireside Lounge, and that's where they show up. And it seems like Hasselhoon may have been the intermediary where he was making phone calls and just trying to figure out. I don't know the extent of it. And
so my guess is that what I think happened is that Hasselhoon was working on behalf of the conglomerate more hooked into the Western route. And even
are you talking about the Denver one or the other one?
No, California, Vegas.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
And I think that he was trying to sick this guy, McKinney, onto Shepard, because Shepard was working for their competitors. That's what I got from between the lines here. That for sure McKinney and Shepard were set up. The shipment ended up not coming through. Doc, for whatever reason, did not make the drive down to Denver that night. And
okay. Yeah. Can I ask you, but what do you think happened? Because Jimenez doesn't even speculate where the shipment went to. That's what was weird to me. He's like, we don't know whose hands it ended up in. It certainly didn't end up in McKinney's hands.
It seems like if there was a shipment, it was directly to Fort Collins. I think he mentions that somewhere.
But do you think that it never even got to Laramie? Like, I think
that it got canceled or pushed off to a later date. I think that Doc O'Connor caught wind of all this.
Yeah.
Basically, because this idiot McKinney had made a lot of noise and spent a lot of time and had, they were going around a lot of places. This Hasselhoon guy probably was. He was not a very good spotter for him.
He was pretty stupid from what it sounds like in the book.
All these people, I mean, when you think about all these people, they're all pretty dysgenic. Like this is not like the behavior of somebody that's mentally balanced and has their shit together. None of this book is, and I want to talk about that in a little while too. I want to get the story kind of out there, and then I want to go from there, kind of like what we learned, what we can extrapolate on a bigger picture. So the shipment gets canceled at the last moment, and McKinney gets upset and gets Shepard, into the truck along with Henderson, and drives them out there and beats this guy. I guess he hit him behind the ear and it caused brainstem
That was the
damage.
One that killed him, and he hit him with like what was it, a 357? But he said he swung it like a baseball bat. Yeah, and it's really, and I guess he was high on meth for like a week. I think he was
withdrawing at this point, which was part of his excellent decision-making process.
He hadn't slept though for like, he might have slept, but he had not really slept for like 7 days, and he was on meth and he's going through withdrawals. Sure. And he's like, I believe it when he's talking about hallucinations and stuff. I mean,
shadow people.
Yes, but it is just. What really grosses me out is like, I think that the value of the meth was $10,000. Imagine if I just huge. Yeah. I mean, but it's like, okay, Matthew Shepard was making like $400. every whatever week or 2 weeks doing the meth runs. I forget exactly, but it's like he obviously blew through that and he became addicted to meth, and that's what Doc used him as like to trick him out and stuff. And that's, as you said, who Doc liked. But okay, if I like came to you and now I was like, hey, Baruch, can you kill this guy for 10 grand? Like, no person who has their shit together is going to be like, yeah, 10 grand. That's
Right.
really a good deal. Like, that's still just pissant money, even in the 90s.
Oh yeah, of course. Like the low end of the food chain, for
And I have
drug
a shit
distribution,
job. I'm just saying though, like
they're always like not making huge amounts of money. So
yeah,
they beat this guy to death. They tie him to, or into a coma. They tie him to a fence.
yes.
The rest is kind of history. Like inevitably the story. Actually, no, there is one interesting thing. At some point later on, McKinney is assaulted. Now, as he's being
his night's not even over.
Wait. There's two kind of loose ends that I wanted to run by you. But before that, as he's beat this guy, as he's beating him, which I guess he started beating him in the vehicle, as he's beating him outside, Henderson tries to intervene. Henderson's kind of a doofus. He's sort of along for the ride. Both these guys in their pictures, they look like idiots. Henderson, I think, more so. And Henderson tries to like, hey, whoa, and this guy hits him also in the face with the 357.
Yeah, it gets him. He gets like a crescent moon scar under his lip.
Right.
You can see it in the trial photos if you look at a picture of Henderson.
Right, and Henderson has, McKinney, and Henderson's terrified. McKinney tells me like tie this guy up. He ties him, to the fence in some half-assed way. He didn't crucify him obviously on the fence, and then this guy goes and beats this dude to death as he's tied up there. He threatens him, and the guy says something, apparently, or he asks him, "Can you read my license number?" And he says,
Yep.
It's not really clear. He's threatening him not to tell, and beats him to death. The rest of it unravels. They snitch on each other. This McKinney's girlfriend, tells on everybody except for McKinney and makes a bunch of lies.
She is a total weasel, and like Kristen Price, I think was her name, but she like just it was used by the prosecution, and it's really appalling because she is like not a reliable witness. Like
everything
there was a horrible thing that happened there, but. Yeah, they used her like she was reliable.
I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but apparently you can get, hearsay counts as evidence against you, but not really evidence for you.
Yes,
something
that's a good way of putting it.
So anyway, both these guys get life sentences. Henderson gets 2 consecutive life sentences, and they're gone. The national gay lobbies and the media like descend on this thing like vultures, turn them into the gay George Floyd, and the rest history we discussed. Right.
Well, hold on. Yes. Go ahead. I'm finished.
There are two things that I didn't quite understand. One, the cop that's investigating all this has met these guys before at an arson. Right.
Malley. Yeah, oh yeah. The cops knew about this. Is a town of 30,000 people. They knew about Aaron McKinney.
But there was an arson at night. Somebody's car burned down, and this cop goes there and he runs into Matt Shepard, whose story why he's there doesn't add up, and he runs into McKinney, I think, who also it doesn't quite add up, right? Which is weird. It seems like a drug. This is like the kind of stuff that competing drug groups do to each other, before they start killing each other, And then there's another thing, which is after they kill this guy and leave him there, that same night, they're assaulted, and McKinney is beaten severely enough that he ends up actually at the same hospital with head trauma
Matthew Shepard.
As Matthew Shepard, Poudre Valley Hospital. And so who beat him up? Like, it's not clear, but
it was the Mexican. Okay, so
they say it was Mexicans. But this is like I was assaulted by a random black man. Yeah, okay.
There was a guy. Okay, so they took. All right, so again, I'm not like I've read the same book as you. I don't have like special insight into this. I'm looking at the same evidence that you are. But as far as who beat Aaron McKinney up, they took Matthew Shepard. I think that Aaron McKinney did it I'm going to try to address all your points, but Aaron McKinney took Matthew Shepard's license because he thought that the address on the license would have
the dope.
That would be a place where the 6 grams of meth were. But he was, of course, going through withdrawals, as you said, the shadow people. He doesn't even know what planet he's on. He's in a violent rage. And, leading up to, just as an aside, Jimenez describes this week, there was a guy named Monty Durand that Aaron McKinney had beaten up multiple times. First time he beat him up during Laramie, Wyoming's frontier days for selling him bunk meth, which was just, I guess, I don't know what he sold him. Maybe he sold him like candle wax or something, but he beat him severely in front of, Kristen Price and stuff. But then I think maybe it was 2 days before Matthew Shepard's murder, he went to his cousin's house because he knew Monty Duran was staying there. He broke in and he beat him again because he owed him money. So this also fits in the drug thing because it's like, does Matt owe him money? I don't know. It's weird, but it would fit with a pattern. He didn't beat up Monty Duran, and Jimenez did interview Monty Duran, and Monty Duran confirmed that, yes, I was beaten up multiple times. Monty Duran had turned his life around, but Aaron McKinney beats people up over drug debts and stuff. So he's done it like a day before. Is that really that crazy that he's done it again? Now he's going through withdrawals. Maybe he's just a sadist. But
who beat him?
They took, what's that? Well, okay, so they took Matthew's license, and then Aaron McKinney, in an interview, he said that, if you talk about this, I'm going to give your license to certain people. Obviously, who are these certain people? They're not the cops. He's not going to go to the cops. It's people in this drug syndicate that we've been talking about. But then they're looking for, Matthew Shepard's house. Aaron McKinney is high on meth. They're both just in this weird adrenaline freakish thing where they've just done something horrible.
And they get into a confrontation with the Mexicans.
Yes, and the Mexicans, but the Mexicans, yeah, they were damaging. They were just doing vandalism. The cops knew about them, and then because these guys are just criminal masterminds. This is like Robert De Niro and Heat. These are professionals. They are about to steal after committing a brutal murder. Aaron McKinney sees these Mexicans, and rather than just say nothing and get the meth and leave, which probably wasn't even in the apartment, which he can't find because he's going through withdrawals. He's like, "What do you wetbacks think you're doing?" And the Mexicans are like, "What do you care?" And then Aaron McKinney just pistol whips one of them in the head, and you can see a picture, and it looks like a sleeping bag zipper. That's how the book described it. You can see a picture on Google Images. But then the other one takes a club and beats him on the side of the head with it. I don't know, like some shaved off piece, like a mini baseball bat.
You think this was like a random violent encounter?
Yes, I think they came across 2 other ne'er-do-wells.
I don't think it was random, but okay. There's a couple of other things, which is that during, Henderson just shuts up, and
just where I left off, the Mexicans that they encountered that I said they encountered. You think that was tied into the meth syndicate? And I didn't I was listening to what you were saying, and I was interested in hearing what you were saying, but I didn't hear
I can't really tie it in, but this would be the second incident of car vandalism that randomly happens in this little town that these guys are involved in the middle of the night. I don't know.
There's a random police report, and this was suppressed by the media also, and this is kind of, maybe this bolsters your point, where this police officer sees, I believe he went to the house of Daniel Ball. That was the name of the police report, and there was a car on fire.
That was the one.
There was 30 feet in the air, and Matthew Shepard was there randomly, and he's like, "What bar?" The cop is like, I don't know if Matthew set that fire, but it was in a random suburban area. It was past the time when the bars are closed. Matthew was out. He was obviously high on meth, the way the officer describes him. And he's like, "Well, what do you..." And basically, I don't know. He didn't press Matthew further. I don't think Matthew was acting dangerous or whatever. But what I'm wondering is, did the Rohrabacher O'Connor group, did that person owe the Denver people money? Is that why they burned the car? It doesn't seem like Daniel Ball talked about it, but the cop also said that where Daniel Ball worked, there have been some other suspicious fires. I don't know, but none of this came out in trial, and it was mentioned in the Jimenez book, but it's weird. And I'm excited. I was
There's
looking
this
Google Street View for this stuff. I was trying to figure out what's going on with all this crap.
so there's this undercurrent of like drugs, sex trafficking, and violence.
Yes.
But what happens afterwards, the only like really notable things that happened is that Henderson shuts up.
Yeah.
Henderson shuts up and he kind of plays it off as, oh, well, I'm being a tough guy and, just kind of keep my mouth shut. He's not a tough guy. He gets like sexually exploited in jail, has to be in protective custody.
Yes.
And another thing that happens is that his mother, who was a drug addict, he was raised by his grandparents.
Yes.
His mother gets picked up in the middle of the winter by a guy who drives her like 10 miles out of town, rapes her and leaves her like naked in the snow to die. And
yes.
this guy,
and it was like
Dennis
negative
Menifee,
30 outside. Yes.
yeah, this guy, Dennis Menifee, was involved in
The meth trafficking too. He was a meth dealer
and a pedophile. He gets like 4 years for murder.
Yes, that's the thing. Like, how is that? Like, it's hard to rank. Would you rather be pistol whipped or freeze to death or raped? But it's like, how did these disparate sentences make sense? Like,
so I'll tell you how I parse this, but in a second. So Jimenez says that he thinks this was a warning to
yes.
to Henderson that if you don't shut up your grandmother who had raised them, who he loved and so on, was going to be next. And he kept his mouth shut.
She was a nice woman.
Oh, she was a wonderful woman.
He had a horrible child. His mother, Cindy, who died and was raped, she didn't deserve that, but she was not a good mother. She was a drug addict, alcoholic. Right. But
this guy is
she was
passed not around various stepfathers and stuff and getting abused.
She didn't or the grandmother didn't she did the best she could with an awful situation.
Sure. So that's one thing. And then the other thing that before we kind of wrap this thing up, the story up and take a couple of steps back. So he gets his consecutive life sentences, and McKinney, part of his deal was that he wouldn't talk to the press. And
then he did.
And then he did, right? It was a big question, like constitutionally, is that even like legal and so on. There was one last thing before I kind of tell you the context I think all this was happening in, which is that there was a businessman who was a prominent businessman in the Laramie community whom Jimenez does not mention by name, who is involved in all this as kind of a patron of the meth trade. He may be a co-captain of it, as he refers to it, and perhaps also a patron of the gay sex trade. And if I had to guess, like where you could find this guy, I would guess the Eagles Lounge, because this seems to be like the place. My guess is that this whole thing, and Jimenez alludes to this pretty transparently, was being the whole the sex trafficking and the meth stuff was being kind of overseen / supervised by the police. And
they intimate that in the book a lot, like the people that Jimenez talks to.
Yeah. That these guys are basically covering for all these people who are in return collaborating with the police and paying them, and that the business community of Laramie and the more prominent families are benefiting from all this as well. And so therefore, when this whole thing happens, it needs to be squashed. And the way it's squashed is by going, oh, this was a quarrel over some gay stuff. It was a terrible, tragic, isolated incident. Don't mention drugs. Don't mention the gay sex trafficking. These guys actually, the murderers and the victim didn't know each other. He was just a precocious drama student or whatever at the University of Wyoming. How horrible this happened, case closed. And so this fit their agenda, and it fit the national agenda of, as I said, the gay rights thing. In passing, it's mentioned that Shepard was excited about Will and Grace, which Will and Grace, I mean,
yes,
you're familiar. Maybe some of our audience are even younger, or thankfully more isolated from American pop culture. So Will and Grace was kind of this landmark thing where they portrayed an openly gay person on TV in a sitcom as like, oh, he's just like anybody else. He just likes men. He hangs out with his best friend Grace, and she's got a kid, and da 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 da, da, and so on and so forth. And so this was kind of the thin edge of the wedge, and then this was sort of, it was kind of like the carrot and the stick, right? Like, here's like these nice wholesome gay people, and if you don't like them, you're just like Aaron McKinney and Russell Henderson, these bigoted murderers. And that's how this thing got played.
Well, there was a thing in the book, and again, I don't know. They don't ever mention any of these cops by name, but there's stuff even with the Daphne Sulk murder before, which is where this underage girl who was basically being plied with drugs and raped by there was a murder before Matthew Shepard and Laramie that was very gross, and Jimenez basically just mentions this and the Cindy Dixon, which is Russell Henderson's mother, the murders, to just tie into the disparate sentences. And but in both these cases, he discusses corrupt cop. There was a thing where this cop, I think he got found with a bunch of money and possibly drugs in his house, and they didn't arrest him. They just made him quit, which is like, okay, that's a pretty good deal. But the cops, like, a lot of the different people that Jimenez talked to who were bartenders or just meth dealers and stuff, and they mentioned the cops were involved. And so as far as the Doc O'Connor thing, there was a woman whose husband, I guess her and Doc ran rival strip clubs in Denver, I think, before they moved to Laramie. And they were both outlaws, but I think it was her ex-husband. But her husband pointed a shotgun at Doc, and he was trying to steal girls from her husband's strip club. And this is the hog ranch thing you're talking about. Like, there's a lot of good follow-up stuff. If you read this Kindle version, just read the stuff after the book officially ends, because there's a lot of like still meat left on the bone, so to speak. But she's like, Doc, you had the same strategy. He would just take barflies, like these young men, who were addicted to drugs, like Matthew Shepard, or alcoholics or whatever. And Doc was, of course, both those things. And he would just let them stay with him in his like little restored hog ranch. And Jimenez went there one time, and it's abandoned mainly, but he looked under a mattress to see what was under there, and he found a gun. He's like, okay, I'm going to put this back. But these men would eventually, run afoul of Doc, and he would kick them out, and then they would just stay with someone else in the town, including this woman and her husband. I think she ran an antique store, but she had a favorable opinion of Doc. But she's like, why couldn't the cops ever piece two and two together? All they'd have to do is take some of these men that Doc plied with drugs and then had a falling out with, and he could easily just tell them how this whole thing worked. And we've kind of talked about it. The limousines, like, she talks about it a lot too. She's like, I can't piece two and two together with that, because it seems like there's something that smells bad. Which is kind of funny. So it's very clear that, as you said, Doc, and it probably was through the Eagles lounge or whatever.
Lodge, not
the
lodge,
Eagles Lodge. Yeah. The lounge would make it a bar. Yeah, but she would say that her husband would go to the Eagles Lodge, and she didn't like it, but that was a place where they networked. Right there. So that's also telling, as you said. But there was a guy, Jimenez, this is the aftermath of, like, after the epilogue of his original book, but Doc O'Connor sent him a picture of his bruised face. Like, I'm talking about Doc. Some guy named John Snitker had just beaten the crap out of Doc and then taken like a kitchen knife and stabbed this meth dealer who was also friends with Doc. It's weird how Doc knows all these meth dealers and just scumbags. But I guess he'd given this guy who was like twice his age, I'm assuming they had sex or whatever, but he'd given him money for meth, and the guy didn't pay. So this guy, John Snitker, who Doc was also having sex with, he stabbed him to death. And Doc testified at his trial, and he said, yes, this guy, John Snitker, was bisexual like Aaron McKinney. He specifically mentioned that. And, he also mentions the person who found Matthew Shepard's body. Um, I forget his her first name. His last name was Kreifels, but in Omaha, which is, believe it or not, like it does touch Wyoming. He was arrested for drug charges and having a gun and having like tens of thousands of dollars in cash. Like basically his point is like Russell Henderson's girlfriend overdosed in Salt Lake City.
All these people
Like
were doomed.
yeah, Ryan Bopp, the person who gave Aaron the gun, he died through withdrawals. Like it's horrible. Like this, it's a scourge of these towns. And if they'd wanted to actually help people, they could have focused on the drug stuff, not the gay hate crime stuff, which is like so stupid because it's like a gay prostitute kills another gay prostitute. Like that's not a hate crime.
So the way I read this book, it's first of all, it's a little bit of a microcosm. I've seen this stuff. I mean, I didn't see exactly this stuff, but the people that I met in medium-sized towns like in Colorado Springs and its surroundings, or in other like small, medium-sized towns in like Heartland America, there's always kind of a scene that's a little bit like this, where if you dig a little bit deeper, you can see this sort of stuff. There was a similar, maybe we'll discuss this in another episode. If you read the Franklin cover-up, which was about Omaha, Nebraska, and the story there allegedly is that there was basically there was less drugs and more just straight up child or underage sex trafficking, prostitution, which was run by some of the more prominent members of the town, which was covered by the police, like it was an open secret, which was providing prostitutes to politicians in D.C. and national level people, and apparently had cover from the intelligence agencies in some sense, sort of like a proto Epstein Island. Lots and lots of parallels. Many parallels here. Maybe we'll discuss someday. But what it really reminded me of, and look, and what you have here is basically a network of kind of a network of homosexual criminals who are pumping this place, and by extension Wyoming, full of meth, which at this point is an underground thing, and getting massive amounts of people addicted to it, and basically rotting this place from the inside out. And you can make the argument that a lot of these Western towns, like organized crime, came to them before the U.S. government did.
Yes.
A lot of
some of this is probably gold rush stuff.
Yeah, and a lot of these people, came from the east. You get the hell away from the U.S. government, and the U.S. government came following after them.
Just as an aside, if you watch the 2020 interview, and I'm sure you've looked at the pictures of Doc O'Connor, and Jimenez admits that he does have some charisma and stuff. I think he's a piece of shit. I'm not defending anyone in this story. It's like that Norm McDonald meme where he's like, I think everyone involved in this should die. I'm not going to go that far, but like, that's not my point. I think it's a tragedy, but I think the survivors are pretty gross people a lot of the time. Like, I don't think that Doc O'Connor is a good man by any standard, but watching with the HBO show, there's a lot of anachronisms, but even the way Doc O'Connor looks, he looks like Al Swearingen, which is the Ian McShane character. And yes, and that's a great show. Again, there's a lot of anachronisms.
I was reminded
he looks like him.
He does.
And there's sort of like it seems like there's an archetype of Al Swearingen, which was a real person. Anyway, I did not mean to be like, I'm not trying to be cavalier about it. I think it is pretty gross just what has overtaken this town. Because again, we're talking about all these murders and stuff. This is a town of 30,000 people, man. This is a small town.
And it has
it's a huge state, but it's like there's not a lot of people. I think it's the least densely populated state. I think it might even edge out Alaska, but it's just like, there's some gross shit going on here, and it's not good.
No, this is not like a happy story at all. The only person who called it like more or less on the money was Reverend Fred Phelps, who showed up in this, in the middle of this whole to-do and with his guys and started making his typical homophobic pronouncements, which in this case turned out to be pretty much on the nose. And if you know Phelps's origin story, was basically that he was a preacher in Kansas, and his kids were going through a park in their town, which was kind of more or less same size Laramie, in the evening, and it turned out this place was kind of like the local gay hotspot, and they were kind of accosted or harassed by some gay people, and then he started like making a to do about it. Then you realize like all like the prominent people of the town were in on it. So Phelps's origin story also is kind of a little bit reminiscent of this. What this really reminded me of, it was that movie The Lost Boys. You ever see that movie?
Yes, it's been yeah, no, it's a good 80s movie, but yeah, even like someone who's very like differs from you a lot in terms of like probably polar opposite a lot of things, but even BAP has sort of pointed out that like vampirism and homosexuality, there is like it's sort of like the age thing, you're like tapping into age and you're trying to like kind of suck it dry, no pun intended, but I'm not trying to be gross or whatever, but I mean like
there's the head vampire, right? Who's in this case and he's turning all the like vulnerable young men of this town into vampires, and they're basically sucking the town dry. And in the daytime, everything looks normal, and at night you see these hideous undead ghouls come out. And this is basically, I mean, the Lost Boys, I think, was a metaphor for predatory homosexuality in Hollywood, maybe.
Yeah.
But in this case, it's very much a perfect metaphor.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I haven't read it. I'm going to read the Franklin cover up, and I was honest with you, like I realize there's a couple. I know you have to wrap it up soon, but there's a couple like points that I want to make that will tie into this about this whole like very sad episode. But I'm going to read the Franklin cover up. I'm not like I've seen this reference on other things, but I'm not an expert on it. That's why I didn't want to just talk about it at length. I've read this, a lot about this book and just done my own investigation, but I can't speak for the Franklin. But I guess there's a lot of like wink and nod stuff, like even I've been reading about just the leftist scene. Like I've been reading, what is her name? Decca Mitford stuff on like the San Francisco CPUSA scene. I'm sure you've read all this stuff about Jim Jones and Harvey Milk and all this crap, and you've probably read enough stuff to where it's like basically the distortion is the same as from some of the Matthew Shepard stuff, but it's just like I guess what frustrates me is I don't like the thing where you can't talk about an issue. Like, okay, just as for instance, I've read a bunch of World War II stuff, and I've read, and I've talked to you about this. Like, I've read a bunch of like stuff about the Holocaust. And it's like, read this stuff, and I can tell you that, like, okay, I have my own opinions on it, but I don't like the idea that you can't talk about, like, oh, well, the gays or this, like, there's an ugly side to everything. And there's an ugly side. Like, I believe that the Holocaust, there's a lot of evidence for it, but it's like, we talked about Joel Brandon stuff. And it's like, some of the time there's no good guys, but it's like, you should be able to talk about this. And even if it makes everyone look bad, I don't think there's any heroes in World War II, but it's like, you should be able to talk about this regardless of how ugly the reality is. Does that make sense?
I agree with that. I do.
I mean, it's just that's kind of what history is a lot of the time. It's gross. I mean, I'm sorry, like it's gross.
Well, yeah, you're right in that the narrative. This is a very, very good book. In that sense, I'm glad you recommended it to me. Because it kind of shows how the official narrative, if not for this book, and who knows, even maybe with this book, the official narrative of this particular event and this particular place is homophobic rednecks kill college student for being gay. How much of our received history is basically as far distant from the actual truth as the official narrative here was from that. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. I have a friend who kind of like the larger context within which all this exists, right, is also very interesting. I have a friend who's from a county in rural Kentucky, which is on the border of Harlan County, which, if you listen to like old country music,
Justified.
It's like the prototypical like Eastern Kentucky,
yeah. There's a show called Justified that's pretty decent. That's in Harlan County.
Right. So it's like the prototypical Eastern Kentucky, like poverty-stricken, like hillbilly place to be from. And he describes his town as kind of the society just decayed from the 60s onwards, where it became, they used to be poor, but they were religious. And then it just became completely normal to be divorced, and then it became normal to just have kids out of wedlock, and it became completely normal to get high or be drunk, or like basically live this like kind of in this fabric of shittiness and dysfunction, right? Like that's normal, like a normal functional family, and everybody's like a law-abiding citizen. That's like that became abnormal and it changed very quickly within a few decades. Jobs got shipped off, blah blah blah, but like it was more of the cultural shift where it became normal to be dysfunctional. And everybody in this story, the only one in this story that came from like a normal family background, apparently, at least where mom and dad stayed together and made a living, is Shepard. And he, obviously you can see, he was far from normal. Everybody else.
Wait. I thought I didn't. Okay. Can I just add I thought they were from out west. I know his family lived in Saudi Arabia, but there's two things, and I want to add this to the point, that I just made about there's no like good guys. It's just creepy, disgusting government stuff. But like when Matthew Shepard stared, like I thought that he, for whatever reason, had his ties in Wyoming, but there were two people, Alex Trout and Walt Bolden, I think. Yeah. And I'm not trying to get a suit for libel, but these, like, I think it was both of them that pushed the anti-gay stuff, even though they knew different. Like, I think that Matthew Shepard said that Alex Trout was a speed freak, so he was obviously doing meth with him. He's probably going to the orgies and stuff with them, but Walt Bolden, if you look at the interviews, he's like this freaky ass, like almost 50-year-old man. He's got like not even have all his teeth, and it's just like he had a relationship with Matthew. What's that?
Was he a college professor? I think.
Quite possibly. He's got all the libtard prerequisites, but I mean, he was just talking about how close he was with Matt, and it's like, well, were you paying him to hang out with you? Like, he looks like a freak. But they called the media after this happened, even though it's clear that Alex Trout and them, again, allegedly, we'll say allegedly, we're not trying to get, but it's like,
according to the book.
Yeah, according to the book, but it's like they were doing meth with him, but they knew all the stuff. But the point I'm making is like, what was Alex Trout's relationship? Were you his meth buddy? And what was Walt Bolden's relationship? Were you like was he your rent boy? And they were the ones who turned this into this gay issue. And, the statements that Matthew Shepard's like parents wrote were written by gay advocacy groups, the same way that for all of these politically charged like murders and stuff, they were
like
taken over by
Trayvon Martin's parents.
There's documentaries on this. I don't want to get into that right now, but I mean there's stuff like it's just one of those like man bites dog things, and it's just like
immediately these guys show up and start leveraging this thing. Like they're very well prepared to.
when I mentioned like the thing with the Dred Scott, which was fake, or like the Rosa Parks thing, it's like I don't care whether you feel these issues were justified. And when I bring this stuff up, it's not that I like necessarily when you look at the past stuff, it's sort of always creepy because it's not a society that exists anymore. So it's always going to seem antiquated and weird. And I think, frankly, if liberals actually engage in this kind of stuff, they would feel the same way, even about liberal stuff. That's not the point. I'm just saying, though, that if you look at the gears turning, like you can see how this stuff happens. It's a pattern that exists to where we stand right now. Like at this present moment, they will look for an issue and they will push it. And the truth is immaterial. And this is just common practice probably throughout human history. Like I'm not like a world history expert. I've just mainly been reading about American history, but it's an old game. And okay, fine. But it's like you can think that the outcome was worth it, but let's also just acknowledge that
you got there by lying on industrial.
Yeah,
you got there
exactly.
by lying on an industrial scale.
I mean, it's like with Elon Musk. He was talking about Nelson Mandela. It's like, dude, are you kidding me? Like, I am not an expert in Africa, but like, do you know how much info there is on Nelson Mandela? He was a terrorist. Like, I don't support terrorism. I don't care if it's right wing or left wing. I don't think that killing civilians is the right thing to do. And I don't care the reason you plant a bomb in. I mean, you know, the stuff like the October 7th stuff or whatever, like that stuff. I think didn't they show it to Greta Thunberg or whatever, however you pronounce that, her name.
I'm
like
not
that
sure
weird...
if they showed it to Greta. Yeah, the little Down syndrome girl from Sweden.
But it's just like this should be shown to everyone. Like, if you support this issue, fine. This is what that means to support this issue. You want to support this issue? Listen to John Brown frothing at the mouth and just screaming, and look at what he did. Let's look at the aftermath. Like, let's just be honest about what that means.
Sure.
And I'm sorry for getting
there's something
on the tangent.
There's something while we're going on tangents, there's something kind of interesting that I want to mention. A lot of the communist spies had kind of this weird, they were on the gay scene, the British ones especially.
Yes, 100%.
And also in America, you had Whittaker Chambers or whatever. And there's this aspect of the gay scene which is like, it's kind of an open secret to anybody.
Wait, do you think that Whittaker Chambers was gay?
I think he had a troubled sexuality. I think.
I'm agnostic about this. Like I talked about it in the Durr episode. I don't know.
He was. But a lot of these guys were
he was a
Cambridge
theater kid.
Yeah.
Exactly. The Cambridge Five. Yes,
and pretty much all. I mean, anybody that went to Cambridge and Oxford, you can have the question mark there.
They even had a term called fagging, where they beat you with a paddle. Yeah.
At Eton, yes.
Yes.
So there's kind of this constant aspect of, and this goes back to probably like prehistorical, you look at like Papua New Guinea, and you have the same thing. But, in like the modern gay scene, there's a thing called swinks, and there's like the rough trade, and basically it's just normal for, older dudes to pay young guys, who might be underage, might look like they're underage, paying for sex. Yes. That's like a constant on the scene. And that was sort of that was a big part of this whole thing, where these guys who were already in this kind of criminal, disgusting underworld were like, oh, cool, and taking drugs and drinking to excess is kind of a big part of the gay scene there. There's a novel not a novel, a book by a guy named Larry Kramer, who was I don't know if he's still alive, who was a New York City gay journalist, and about like the gay scene in New York City back in the 70s, and it's called faggots. I'm not sure why he called it that, but it's probably on Amazon.
Yes, you are.
If you type faggots into the Amazon search bar, it'll probably come up. Actually, I wonder if it does. I bet you it does.
Well, you have to type in straight guys turned out, and then you have to type
no.
X-Hamster.
I'll get a bunch of urban fiction by what's that guy's name?
William Burroughs. No. It's
Yeah.
there
it is.
It's just fiction. It's just fiction.
Faggots
Come
by
on, guys.
Larry Kramer. All right, cool. So and basically like drugs and alcohol are like an integral part of the scene, and sexual exploitation or sexual commerce with young men is an integral part of this whole scene. And it turned into, and if you read like William Burroughs, you can also see it was the case back then.
William Burroughs to me is just like, I've read his stuff. I've read J.G. Ballard stuff. I don't like wholesome. William Burroughs. It's
not wholesome recreational reading at all.
But not just that. It's just like, I don't like this. I've never liked it. Like, I don't like, we talked about Faulkner in the last episode. I don't like that kind of just aimless, I don't know.
Stream of consciousness,
if that makes sense. Well, but it's like, even with Faulkner, it's like, okay, these people aren't total pieces of shit. But it's like with Burroughs, it's like, okay, yeah, you are.
Yeah. There's no redeemed qualities. And that was kind of the scene. So what the scene kind of seamlessly turned into pumping drugs into America. And Burroughs is actually, the Beats are a perfect example, right? Like they made doing drugs kind of mainstream and cool and hip.
Yeah.
Where before it was like this little niche underground thing. And these guys made meth kind of mainstream and cool in this case in Wyoming, but I mean, it was a huge, in the early 2000s, things were pretty methed up in Heartland America. It was.
Did you say messed up or methed up?
They were methed up.
Yeah, I mean, both, they were messed up and they were methed up.
Yeah, and it hadn't been like that, a decade earlier. So this stuff got pumped in and distributed by networks like the one in this book. Just usually they didn't have a catastrophic blow up like this one did.
Okay, well, can I just I know that you have to like go to sleep soon, but can I just talk about the Dennis Menifee interview at the end of the book? And just
Menifee again was the guy that killed Cindy Dixon.
Yes.
Henderson's kind of absentee mother while Henderson was sitting in jail.
So Cindy Dixon, and I think her husband, after Matthew Shepard was just viciously beaten to death, and the news, like the carrion bird like media was there just trying to omit anything that would make the lifestyle and so forth that he was involved in look bad. But Cindy Dixon and her husband were in bars in Laramie, and this is a small town. There are a lot of bars, but everyone knows each other. And if you're in the drug trade, everyone knows each other. I mean, it's a small town. But they were talking about how Matthew Shepard was murdered over drugs, and that's what that John something Baker. You can look this up yourself. Look up his mugshots and stuff. It's fascinating stuff. But Cindy Dixon, who was the woman who would eventually die of hypothermia after being raped in, the Wyoming elements, she was in there just talking about how, Matthew Shepard's murdered over dope. And the way that Dennis Menifee describes it is that he says that he dropped his wife and kids off at the Ranger Bar. And the Ranger Bar, if you recall Baruch and me talking about it, was the bar that was a male hustler hotspot. So I don't know that Doc O'Connor was part of this, but we've already described at least 3 different homosexual conduits into this small 30,000 population town. But this guy, Dennis Menifee, took her out, 8 miles outside of town, civilization. And the way he describes it to Jimenez is that he wanted to smoke weed and not be disturbed by the cops. But like, this guy has been charged with the most serious crimes imaginable. And the idea that he would have to travel 9 miles outside of town where there's no elements to smoke weed when he's dealing meth, he's a rapist, he's just a piece of garbage. It doesn't make any sense. I don't buy that he was scared of getting charged with like getting a roach or something. But the way that he describes it is he says that, well, I had sex with her, she didn't want to have sex, and then she said, "You're a rapist," so I kicked her out of my truck, and she wasn't properly covered for the elements, so she died of hypothermia. But it's like, that's one of the causes of death for Matthew Shepard. And again, Baruch talked about it a lot. Like, that was a warning to Russell Henderson. Menifee was like bragging at parties, and this is, the kind of man he is. Like, and this is super weird to me because it's like, you're proud of this. Like, even if you're in the criminal underworld, like, oh yeah, I raped this woman and left her out in the woods. But he was bragging. He's like, I was the one who left Cindy Dixon out in the woods. And it's just like, that's how he described it. And an informant told the authorities, and that's how they arrested him. He went back down to Florida after that, and he knew Aaron McKinney. He called him Squirrel. That was his nickname for him. And the bottom line is, his repulsiveness does not end here, because he ended up in, I think, 2016, maybe 2017. And I had not read this final interview with Jimenez and Menifee, but Menifee was living in Ohio. I think he was doing some oil stuff, but he saw this 9-year-old girl walking near the library, and he just grabbed her and put her in his car, and he raped her. And he said something like, don't tell anyone. And he was wearing a vest. She described him to the police, and then he got life imprisonment, and he admitted to all this. But later on, I guess he read Jimenez's book. And okay, hold on. There was another girl. He raped this girl, but there was another girl that he had raped months earlier. And with that hanging over him, he still raped another girl. So at his sentencing trial, he was crying. He's like, oh, I wish I'd never gotten involved with like meth or whatever. But this is a person, and Aaron McKinney is a piece of shit. But I'm saying that this guy Menifee, who did what he did to Cynthia Dixon, and based on what he did later, like, is a bigger piece of shit. But
was connected.
Yeah, he was connected to this meth ring, but he was crying. He's like, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't. I wish like I deserved to be in jail." And it's just like, dude, shut up. Like, but because he read Jimenez's book, he did an interview with him, and this ties into everything Baruch and I were talking about earlier. But he said something like, yes, I knew Matthew Shepard, and you were right, because Jimenez had gotten this from other people. I knew Aaron McKinney, and Menifee was like, I knew I was dating, like I was having sex with some woman at the university that Matthew was going to, because Matthew Shepard wasn't living in there. I mean, he was up there dealing drugs, but he didn't actually have a permanent residence there for very long before he was killed. It was probably like 6 or 7 months. But Menifee was buying cocaine, and I think the way he described it, like in bulk from Shepard, over the period of several months. And then he stopped dealing with him for whatever reason. But the thing that Menifee said about like Shepard and why he was murdered is he said that Shepard's like, he said that Shepard was basically cutting the dope, and that's why he was stopped, i.e. killed. Like he said that basically Shepard was, I guess, adding additives to the meth and stuff. And it's kind of weird because it's like that ties in, that fits with everything we know about, because there was a scene where Shepard met Aaron McKinney at the like a gas station, and McKinney said, "Watch your back." And there was a scene where the author Jimenez was
accosted,
talking to some guy named Kyle, and he was meeting him at some rest area, and then he's like, "Why did Shepard die?" And then Kyle said, "Yeah, he was stealing stuff from the rest of us." And then these cars pulled up and they were about to like threaten him or kill him. I don't know what they were going to do. Jimenez escaped. But basically, it sounds like if you're listening to this, you got to read the book. But it sounds like Shepard was, he was in debt and stuff. He was diluting the meth and like whatever. And he pissed off a lot of people. And that's what, the businessmen from the Eagle Lodge and stuff were warning him about. I don't know this for sure, but I'm just saying that it's pretty weird.
It's definitely,
I just want to add that.
That's one of the things that you see, that the people are saying, well, he was moving too fast, came down and was doing all this stuff, and he was stepping on our toes and so on and so forth. I'm not sure. It's not clear. What is clear is that, he was kind of like the tip of the iceberg in this place.
Yes.
When he was dead, and the guys that killed him, or the guy that killed him, went to prison, the iceberg continued on its way, right? Like there's no reason for any of this to stop. And this is kind of a microcosm of a lot of stuff, in some ways, kind of a doomed small town America in a way, and kind of the interplay between organized crime and law enforcement / intelligence / academia / like conventional business. I think again, the Lost Boys is really on one level really a perfect metaphor for what was going on in this area at this time, and probably still is. I mean, I assume that it's worse now. Doc at least had some sort of like personal charm, maybe some kind of old Western, like local anti-hero villain, charm. Whoever replaced him, I expect is much nastier.
That's probably true. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I really like true crime stuff, and I read as much of it as I can get my hands on. But yeah, you feel like you need a shower from some of this stuff. It's just gross. I mean, and what really is kind of sad to me is just like the idea of just doing that to someone. Like, all right, if it's like, if I gave you $10 million, would you do this? Like, okay, there's plenty of people, but
there's people who do it for free.
Yeah, but it's just like 10 grand or whatever the stakes were here, and the money, the meth never even touched down, but it's just like, you have no soul.
Guys get killed for stepping on somebody's shoe all the time.
Yeah.
Or over nothing. This was like the least shocking and surprising part of the book to me, just because I kind of met people like this and I know a little bit what they're about.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, we got to wrap it up.
Yeah, I'm sorry I've begun going on all these digressions and stuff, man. I apologize.
It's good. That makes the book reviews good, I think, in a way. Cool. So thank you guys for being with us on the Postkahanism podcast as we review this book, The Life of Matt.
Or the Book of Matt.
The Book of Matt, sorry, by Stephen Jimenez. I'll put a link to it in the description. Highly recommend it. Okay, appreciate you guys being with us. With me and Dictator's Den, and have a good one.